let's please welcome our host for the next session, Ian on stage, who is like a senior executive at MongoDB and who is going to introduce our speaker for this final fireside chat of the day. So please give a warm round of welcome to Ian. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you. So, thanks for sticking with us to the end of the day. I know all the speakers really appreciate that. And I'm delighted to introduce your penultimate panel speaker for this afternoon. It's Stan Chudnovsky. He's got a long and illustrious career, now heading a venture fund called NFX as a co-founder. He's going to be telling us a little bit about his career history. And join me on the sofa, please, Stan.
Hey.
You know, I just furnished my new home, and I'm thinking I maybe wished I'd seen these sofas before I furnished it. It's a really nice piece of furniture, so welcome to the stage.
Your chair is higher than mine, so
yeah,
everything works out.
That's definitely a power move.
Actually, before we even start, given this is almost last session, and I know everyone is tired, but the people who are most tired are the people who prepared that whole thing for us. So can I get the round of applause for the team and for Vlad, who put that all together for us?
Okay, so we've got quite a few topics to discuss, Stan. Before we get into the detail of what you're up to now and what you were doing in your last role, maybe you could start by introducing yourself to the audience and given that you've been in the US since the mid-90s working in tech, maybe a slightly abridged rundown of your career history in the US.
Well, since you started from 90s, that's probably, yes. Let's start from there. So I got to US to Silicon Valley in '94, which sort of like definitely way longer than my accent would suggest. And I'm engineer by trade, so I worked as an engineer for a number of years. And then I kind of figured that startups, that's where my interests lie, or at least that's how I felt at the time. And I did my first company, which actually didn't work out, but I learned a lot. And after that, I did 4 successful startups, one after another. The fourth one, and that was already 2011, I think, was called Iron Pearl, and that was the company that PayPal acquired. And my business partner went to Switzerland to spend a couple of years there with his kids who were growing up. And I was always interested to learn what it is to run big company from the very top. So I actually went to PayPal. And for a while, I was VP of Growth, Global Strategy, and Special Operations, which included M&A and things like that. So I worked there, and one of the projects that I've done at the end was split from eBay. That was my project, sort of making PayPal independent company, as history proved it deserved to be an independent company. And at that time, I was sort of like, okay, so I've done most of the things that I wanted to accomplish at PayPal. I know what it feels like to be part of the management team of a very large company. So I've done startups, I've done that. I also, during that time, started to do a bunch of angel investing, and I felt like we are getting pretty good at that. Bunch of companies we invested early worked out quite nicely. We invested in DoorDash in the first round. We invested in Lyft in the first round. So there was a bunch of successes that were already clear were going to become fairly large companies even back then. And so we started NFX. So I'm co-founder of NFX, which back then was very small, but since then it has gotten quite large. It's probably at this point the largest exclusive seed and pre-seed fund out there. The last fund was $450 million, and we don't spray. We only invest in seed and pre-seed. And our sort of desire is to be the first check-in and then stay with the company through to the IPO. So I started that, and the vision was always there, and I had amazing partners to do it with. And then that's about when Mark called me again, Mark Zuckerberg, and offered to come to Facebook back in the day. And we spent a bunch of time talking about it, and it was hard for me. And what I was telling him is that, like, look, I don't know why I would join another big company, though I've always been fascinated by Facebook and by the nature of that company and by everything that Facebook was bringing to people. But I don't know why I want to go into big company, because big companies are A, hard, B, I already have that experience. And, but I'm like, we could give it a try in case, if you're okay with the probability distribution as such that if things don't work out, I'm out of here in the next couple of months, and that's like 20%. And most likely case is I'm here for 2 years, and we build a bunch of stuff together, but then I learn what I want to learn, and you get what you want to get, and then I'm out. And then there is a 20% on the other side of the bell curve that are going to stay here for longer. So if you're okay with that probability distribution, then we can shake hands. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And so I'm like, okay. And clearly, we ended up on that other side of the bell curve. I spent almost 8 years there.
Yep.
And my last day, though, was May 20th, and just a month ago. And since then, I am finally figured out that now I have time to come here, and here we are sitting.
Great. So I've heard a few interviewees on the stage today talk a little bit about transitioning from Eastern Europe to the US, and I'd love to hear your take on that. What did you find when you initially went to the US and started to establish a series of startups there? What advice might you give to young entrepreneurs here in Romania today who are thinking about taking the same steps that you took?
Probably two things. One is that whatever your dream is, you are probably not dreaming large enough or big enough. Dream bigger. The only one regret I ever had in my life, in my entrepreneurial career at least, is that I haven't been dreaming large enough or big enough, because that is something that carries you through all upsides and downsides of the hard work of running a company, especially in times like now when everything is uncertain. And very few frameworks actually exist. So everyone's journey is a unique journey. But what unites them is, for everybody who is very successful, that person always had unbounded ambition. Because think about it this way. There are only literally 2 reasons why startups die. Number 1 is that you run out of money. And number 2 is that founder runs out of conviction. And guess what? These 2 are actually highly correlated, because if you have very high-level conviction, that helps you to get more money into your company.
Yep.
And that is one thing that is always there and with you. And also in my sort of like investing career, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for founders who have unfounded ambition and who are ready to go all in and who are going to survive through all the upsides and downsides. And that is incredibly contagious. It's contagious to entrepreneurs, it's contagious to the investors, it's contagious to other people around you, it's contagious to the employees that you're going to hire, and it's definitely something that you need to bring with you if you are to seriously consider moving to Silicon Valley. Because you're also going to be competing for all of those things with people who have absolutely unbounded ambition. And you need to match in order to be successful in that competition. Number 2 is that times really have changed since I moved. When I moved to Silicon Valley, that was the place. If you wanted to be in Silicon Valley, you needed to go there. You needed to move there physically. Well, guess what? It's all different now. Silicon Valley is not a place anymore. Silicon Valley today is an idea. It's virtual. It's in the cloud, one would say. And that means that there are a lot of Silicon Valley things that you can do without actually having your presence there or having moved there. So before taking that step, given what I just said, the advice I would give is probably sit down and try to figure out what exactly are you trying to achieve with that move of yours. Are you trying to have more access to the capital? Are you trying to hire a team there? Are you trying to create a community around you that's going to carry you over through all the upsides and downsides and things like that? And once you answer those questions, then write very clear goals that are associated with what you're trying to achieve. And then if those goals seem achievable and worthwhile taking a leap, then of course go, and you're going to be very successful in making that move. But go through that exercise first before jumping over the pond.
Got it. Turning to your time at Facebook and Meta, you were leading messaging platforms there. Now, we were chatting a little bit earlier and described that as an organization with billions of users and thousands of really important employee stakeholders that help deliver it. You did emphasize the thousands of employees as being super important. So that's an incredibly complicated organization with a huge product that many customers rely upon. Must have been really challenging to lead that organization. What were the biggest lessons that you learned in your time at Facebook and Meta?
There were probably many, but let's try to go through the list of at least three. One is probably keeping everybody aligned is incredibly important. And what it means is that in small company, again, you just get alignment naturally from the fact that you're sitting in one room and talking to each other all the time, and you have one goal, and generally it's around survival, and so you know everyone there is signed up. In large company, in large organization, and that's going to be also true for your startups as they hopefully grow, that changes. And what it means is that no time that is spent on communication is time wasted. More you can communicate, the better. Clearer you can communicate, the better. More crisp your message is, the better. More times you are repeating that message, the better. And what you need to do as the organization grows is also to make sure that the people who you are managing are repeating that same message with the same words also very frequently, and people they manage do the same thing to their teams, and the whole thing kind of scales down. If you achieve that, that's like awesome, and then you get the whole team on the same page. The second one is recruiting, because one of the most important things you can do is obviously to find the right people to drive your organization forward. So again, using the same wording, no time spent on recruiting is wasted time. Of course, you need to think about it and you need to do it right, but at a certain level, 20–30% of your time should be just recruiting only, because that's what you generally do. And you have to get really good at it. And number three is accountability. Now you have communicated everything, everyone agrees with you on the product strategy, there is a clear path, there are a clear set of goals, making sure that people are actually delivering what they said they're going to deliver, and be ruthless and about that, and building the culture of execution where accountability is front and center and no excuses are sort of tolerated, is the third thing that you need to always focus on. And that generally builds the best teams. And that's another sort of like thing. Bigger you get, harder it gets to have a very high-performing team. And the analogy is the same as it is with like soccer team, for example. When you have 12 people, you can do it, but imagine if you need to play soccer and you have many more players on the field. That gets more and more complicated, so you need to constantly tune that team. The last thing is, that will be force. I guess you need to create feedback loop on all four for yourself. How well are you doing on communicating? How well are you doing on recruiting? How well you doing on keeping people accountable? And it's easy on recruiting because you can sort of like look at everything what you've done 6 months later and compare, but you need to do that because if you don't do it for yourself, who else is going to keep you accountable? On communication, it's the same thing. You need to sort of like see if the messages that you're trying to get in are getting organically repeated, or you have to work hard for it. And if not, then you need to improve how you're doing your thing. And obviously, the same thing on accountability, because if you feel that everyone around you is constantly doing a good job, then something is wrong as well.
Sounds like those tenets, those ideas, are ideas that you've learned and refined from your time as a founder. Do you agree with that, or do you think some of that stuff was coached into you while you were at Facebook, while you were at Meta?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's way easier to run an organization when you're a founder because, again, you are naturally more aligned with everybody on your team. And I generally think about it as it's almost like gravity. When it's a very small team and everyone is very close to each other, you actually don't really even have to think about it because that force is not in play. It naturally happens. Bigger and bigger is the team, more and more the distance. That's why it's called long force. Yep. The gravity is starting to play more and more important role, and you need to start to pay attention to gravity because it starts to pull everything in bazillion different directions, and you need to compensate for it. Yep. So I think it's kind of a combination of both that created those lessons. But I will have to tell you that absolutely, to a large degree, bunch of things that I learned in startup helped me greatly in running large organizations. Yeah,
understood. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about NFX. You mentioned it briefly in your intro. Maybe you can introduce the organization to the audience here at Techsylvania, because I guess some of the audience members might not be familiar with it. And tell me more about why you took the decision to start it.
Yeah, good question. So again, NFX is probably the largest pre-seed and seed fund in Silicon Valley. NFX.com, go there, check out the companies we invested in. We also produce a lot of content that a lot of founders find very valuable. NFX stands for network effects. So we generally look for companies that have very clear network effects, or we can help them to develop those network effects because we believe that network effects is what drives more value to the companies over the long run. And these are the companies that I've started, and obviously this is the companies I've worked in. What made PayPal? PayPal is network effect. What's made Facebook? Facebook is network effect. Yep. So that's NFX.
And can you introduce a few of the organizations that you've made investments in?
Yeah, I don't want to name anybody because then the ones I don't name going to ask why I didn't name them. Again, I can speak about things that we did pre-NFX because it's sort of like long history. DoorDash I already mentioned, Lyft I already mentioned, Goodreads we sort of incubated, another company that got acquired by Amazon. Bunch of others pretty interesting ones that me directly or my partners invested over time. One of our partners, Gigi Levy Weiss, he is one of the most prolific angel investors in Israel, very famous guy on investment scene there. He invested in almost all the Israeli big gaming company, Playtika, Now Papaya Games is doing incredibly well. So I can go on and on, but again, as I said, all the names are on websites, the ones that we announced, so you can go and check it out.
Cool. And what do you consider to be the biggest trends? I mean, you've been in the startup ecosystem for a long time, over 20 years. What are the trends that you've seen that have kind of caused shockwaves or ripples through the ecosystem more broadly? You talked about network effect as being something that you're really focused on now, but what did you see historically, and what do you think are going to be the biggest trends in the future that will impact investment decisions or the market more generally?
Well, we live through interesting times right now, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And I generally expect that time to continue for a while. And what makes it interesting is the fact that I think we're going to go through the period of what I call price discovery. That's going to sort of like go through the markets over quite a bit of time, and we can argue for how long it's going to go, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and all of that going to depend on a bunch of factors that we probably shouldn't necessarily go into right now. But price discovery is sort of like starts with the top and then kind of moves down to the early stages. And the top is obviously public markets, and there are a bunch of companies on the public market that no one right now knows exactly where they're going to settle and how to value them, because it's pretty clear that the multiple is going to change, but not clear how they're going to change. And that creates problems, but also opportunities. On problem side, which what we are focusing on right now, again, that just generally means that you go out there and there are a bunch of companies and you are not sure whether these companies are going to be 30% up or 30% down in a matter of a month, and where it's going to settle and how it's going to trade going forward. What it means is that from there it proliferates to very big private companies that were thinking about going public circa 2023, but probably no more. And no one knows how to value them, because there are those public comps that haven't been settled yet, and there are like those private companies that are downstream from the above, and people don't know. So it's going to be a bunch of price discovery, because some of them are going to start running out of money, so they're going to hit the markets to try to raise money from the markets. They're going to get valued somewhat, one way or another, probably not as richly as they used to be valued. And that's going to inform the market about what's going on the level deeper, which is sort of B's and C's round companies, which are now completely gray because no one knows how to value them whatsoever. And once that works itself through the systems, then you get into the very early stages, stage A, stage seed, pre-seed, and things like that. And so that's going to take a while. For us, we actually, on the NFX side, I don't think we see much of the change in the very early rounds, meaning is that if it's an amazing group of founders, again, with unbounded ambition and very good idea in a market that we believe is going to be big, and network effects that can be at play at some point once the company starts to get successful, I think it's still great investment, because by the time that company is actually getting somewhere, it's probably going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and the whole system going to flesh itself out of all the excesses of the last couple of years. And as long as you have sort of 30 months worth of cash in your bank, I think you're good.
So what advice would you give to a founder or founding team in a seed or pre-seed startup right now?
Yeah, that's like what I said. Have 30 months.
And has that changed over the course of the last year to 18 months?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a year ago that you should have 30 months worth of cash on your balance sheet to ensure your survival. I wouldn't say that. But now, and I'll tell you why it's 30 months, is because people are generally saying 2 years. And I'm like, yeah, 2 years is good, but if you want to do if you have enough money in 2 years, that what it really means is that you have to start raising 18 months from now. If you have to start raising 18 months from now, then it might not be enough time for all these excesses to work themselves out. So you don't want to put yourself into a position where you have to take money at whatever valuation is thrown at you. So 30 months feels like a reasonable time frame when you either need to be able to get profitable or you should be able to hit the private markets for the next round and find them interested in what you have to offer. But also, let me just add to that. I sort of hate very generalized advice. It does mean that everybody needs to do that. Like if you have a business that is clearly on fire, if your growth machine is tuned, if you know that for every dollar you're putting in that growth machine, you're going to get $1 back in some reasonable time frame, let's say 3 to 6 months, it's kind of crazy for you to cut it. Because then get some market signal that in your particular business things are starting to slow down, and there is a reason to believe that the dollar you're throwing in there right now gonna not return 3 months from now. And 3 months is abstract number, of course. It might be, depends on your business and what you have. But short of that, just don't go on a hunch on a very generalized advice, because generalized advice is what it is, generalized. And if everyone would be doing the same thing, then we're not going to have many successful companies out there. So you have to tailor it to your own needs, and you make sure that if you have 30 months, but if you are about to become profitable 9 months from now, hallelujah, go for it.
How do you determine, other than the network effect that you talked about, so looking for businesses that have that as a growth engine or as a fundamental characteristic of their model, how else do you take decisions about which organizations represent a good investment for you and the rest of the partners? Are you totally open on sector, on vertical market, or is there more to it than that? Have you got particular sectors or verticals that you prefer?
Well, we like crypto, so we have a partner who just focused on generally crypto. We like bio. We have a partner who is focused on bio. All seed, pre-seed type of stuff. We like prop tech. We have a partner who is focused on prop tech. Sort of like we have that little of specialization going on, but generally we're trying to stay agnostic. I also think that, I don't know about the next couple of years, but over the next 10 years, going to be a bunch of new sectors that we are not even talking right now, that just all of a sudden going to get created, because it feels like the entrepreneurial energy, and you guys see it here. 10 years ago, it would have been unimaginable to see that amount of entrepreneurial energy in a city like Cluj, and here we are right now. So it's going to be a bunch of stuff that's going to create it and recreate it, and we're going to have to start staying agnostic versus picking up sectors and just sitting on them, or at some point it's just going to get old and stale, and it's just not going to go well.
What do you think is driving, you just described there, an expansion, growth in entrepreneurial energy in different cities around the world. What do you think is stimulating that or driving it? Why do you think centers like Cluj are becoming a hotbed for startup activity, and elsewhere in Central and Eastern Europe as well? What do you think the levers are or the factors are that are causing that to happen?
Well, a couple of things. Some obvious factors and some less obvious factors. The obvious factors, of course, proliferation of information. People see what's going on. People read more. People understand. It just doesn't seem that remote. It's basically that phenomenon that I was describing a few minutes ago, virtual Silicon Valley. Yep. That whole thing has been happening for a while, but now I think it's starting to reach velocity, so everyone noticing that. But the second thing is that people just believe. I don't think not only people didn't know, but people also didn't believe they can. They felt like they need to be in a specific place at specific time with specific degrees. have specific connections in order to achieve success. And that was general belief. And I think that's what changed over the last 10 years. People now, in droves, believe that they have power to change things, to build new stuff. And they believe in themselves. And proliferation of that belief is what I think is driving things that you are talking about, including creation of all of those centers all over the world.
Awesome. That's a really inspiring message to wrap up on. Thank you so much, Stan, for joining me. It's been great to chat with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.